This is a visualization to help you with any unresolved conflict in your life. It could be with your partner, with a family member, at work, with your neighbour, anyone with whom you have an ongoing unresolved conflict. It could be a loud, passionate conflict played out in public which many others are aware of, or it could be a suppressed conflict that you have with someone that hasn't so far been expressed, but it's eating you up inside in some way. You may be feeling angry, frightened, intimidated, resentful, frustrated, stressed out, or any number of other difficult and uncomfortable feelings in relation to this unresolved conflict and the person or people involved in it. So let's begin a journey of exploration into your unresolved conflict situation. I'll explain as we go along why I'm asking you certain questions, all of which are designed to help you safely reflect on your situation and to help you think creatively about ways forward in the situation so that you can empower yourself to make the changes you're wanting that will help you to resolve your difficulty. I'm going to ask you first of all to come to an awareness of yourself and how you feel physically when you think about the situation. Sit quietly or lie down and tune into where in your body you feel any stress or tension associated with it. Does it give you a headache? Do you have a fluttering in your stomach? Do you hold your hands or your shoulders or other parts of your body in tension when you think about it? Does your heart beat faster? Do you get a cold sweat? Or perhaps there are other physical feelings or tensions you have when you think about the situation and the person involved. The reason I'm asking you to consider the physical effects on your body when you think about your unresolved conflict is because when we have a difficulty with other people, we often lose connection with ourselves and focus only outwardly on what the people we have the conflict with are doing. This contributes to our feeling powerless in our situation because we can't control what others do. And perhaps more importantly, it means we lose awareness of what we can do to support ourselves. Without being aware of the difficult feelings that arise in us, we can't do anything to help ourselves with them. This is why I asked you to start considering how you feel physically when you think about your unresolved conflict situation and the person or people involved. Where in your body do you feel any stress or tension when you think about it? Now that you've started to gain awareness of the physical feelings that arise, please now take some time to consider the emotions that arise in you when you think about your unresolved conflict. Do you feel angry? Do you feel frightened? Do you feel sad? Do you feel frustration or outrage? Or perhaps you can't put the feelings into words. It doesn't matter if you can't. Just stop to consider what the emotional sensation is that arises within you in response to your conflict. Your physical and emotional responses are important to acknowledge and be aware of so that you can use them as a comparison when you come up with new ideas for how you want to resolve your situation. If your new ideas feel better to you than the feelings you have presently, there's a good chance they will work better for you in the future. Your inner feelings, whether physical or emotional, whether pleasant or difficult, are important messages, a useful tool in helping you to resolve your situation. All too often when we're involved in an unresolved conflict, we stop listening to those messages. In this visualization, it's important to keep that listening channel open as we go through. Now I'm going to ask you to think about how you're responding to your unresolved conflict. If you have an unresolved conflict, you'll always be responding in one or both of the following ways. You'll be trying to win the conflict as if it's a competition, or you'll be trying to avoid dealing with it and the person or people involved. These are the two ways in which all unresolved conflicts are responded to, and the reason why they remain unresolved. It may not be that you're always responding in these ways, but where you are, this will be your contribution to why your situation remains unresolved. And this is why I'm asking you to reflect on this, because where you recognise that you're either competing or avoiding, It shows you where you can create ideas and then carry out those ideas for alternative ways of responding in the future, which will help you to resolve your conflict situation. Now I'm going to say a bit more about both of these ways of responding that always prevent resolution of conflict, so that you can reflect on your own situation and see where you're responding in either or both of the two ways that never lead to an improvement in the situation. First of all, are you competing to win your conflict? If you're competing in order to win your conflict, you'll be saying that the other person is wrong and you are right. You may even have started to say that the other person is bad in some way and you are good, and that you're just a victim of their badness and they should be recognised as a bad person in whatever way you express that. You may have started to gather allies who agree with you about the person who you see as wrong and bad, but you may also have started to find people who don't see the other person as wrong or bad, and it may even be that you now see them as your enemies. Unfortunately, gathering allies and enemies is not doing anything to resolve the situation which the conflict is about. It's simply increasing the number of people involved or affected by it. This is why the competitive approach doesn't resolve the conflict. The personal judgments you have about the people involved and your expression of those judgments through the use of labels distract you from just getting on and dealing with the problem. Your focus on how wrong the other person is and how bad they are means your energy goes into that and not resolution of the conflict. This distraction from dealing with the action or event or behaviour about which there is a conflict means it stays stuck in place, and the competitive response will almost always escalate in intensity while achieving no progress towards resolution. Here are a couple of brief examples, and you can decide if the way of responding is anything like yours, even if the context is different. Joe's neighbour is playing loud music which disturbs him. His neighbour also sometimes puts his rubbish on Joe's drive instead of on his own so that he can get his car in and out. One day it all gets too much for Joe, who goes round when the music is really loud and thumps on his neighbour's door to get his attention. "What's wrong with you people? You're so inconsiderate. Why do you need your music to be so loud? Are you deaf? You're so selfish." Sarah's boss seems to have it in for her. She's always picking on her in meetings and pointing out her mistakes in the office in front of everyone. Sarah knows that other people think she's being bullied because she's asked them and they agreed. Sarah's put in a complaint to HR to say her boss is a bully. In both of these situations, the actions and words of both Joe and Sarah focus on how bad and wrong the people are with whom they have a difficulty. In both situations, it's likely that the things they've said and the actions taken will be seen and heard as personal attacks, and so the other people will be concerned more about that than the actions and behaviours that Joe and Sarah are unhappy with. In Joe's case, he didn't simply ask for the music to be turned down, he called his neighbour names and criticised him, and only made a brief reference to the music and no reference at all to the rubbish. In Sarah's case, she didn't communicate her concerns to her boss about what she sees as happening in meetings and how she feels when comments are made in public. She simply labelled her boss as a bully and taken her concerns to other people instead. Now come back to consideration of your own unresolved conflict. When you've communicated anything about your difficult situation and unresolved conflict, have you made critical comments about the person you have a difficulty with, or labelled them negatively in some way, rather than talk about the actions that have upset you? For now, just notice whether you have or you haven't. Becoming aware of how you've responded is the most important thing. It's also important not to see yourself as wrong or bad for responding in this way. That just leads to guilt and feeling even more stuck. We all respond to conflict in this ineffective way at times. This visualization is designed to help you return to a focus on creating a different and more effective way of responding to the events or actions or behaviours that the conflict is actually about. Now I'm going to ask you to consider if you're using an avoidance response to your conflict. This approach will also never resolve it because, again, the energy and focus is directed away from the actual problem that is the cause of the conflict. If you're avoiding someone or a situation because of an unresolved conflict, you'll be telling yourself things like, "It's best to stay away from them so we don't have an upsetting or embarrassing argument," or "I just can't stand being in the same room as them, so I'm going to miss that meeting on Tuesday," or "Out of sight, out of mind, it just prevents a row if I stay away from them." Unfortunately, while you may believe you're preventing a problem by avoiding someone you have a conflict with, that's a delusion, as you are still having to live your life in a way that is dictated by the whereabouts of the other person. You will have trapped yourself into always needing to know where they are so that you can be somewhere else. In family situations or work situations, this will almost always have knock-on effects on others. Family members won't get to meet you if you avoid going to family gatherings because of a particular family member you have a conflict with. Work colleagues won't be able to draw upon your contributions in meetings or workplaces if you keep yourself away from someone at work who you have a conflict with but are avoiding. And of course, you'll also be missing out on those interactions with others as well. It may be that you can rearrange to meet people that you want to meet at another time, but it's an added burden arising from your avoidance response to the conflict. Alternatively, you may be a manager or a family member who believes you have to take steps to keep others who are in conflict apart, telling yourself it is for their own good. But all the time these avoidance responses are happening, the event or behaviour or action which the conflict is over is continuing unresolved, because no energy or focus is being directed towards achieving that. The focus is on the person or people with whom the conflict arose and not on resolving the conflict itself. Now come back to consideration of your own unresolved conflict. Where have you monitored the whereabouts of the person or people you have a conflict with so that you can avoid meeting up with them? What have you missed out on as a consequence? How long can you continue to do that? For now, just notice whether you have or you haven't done this. Becoming aware of how you've responded is the most important first step. Again, it's important not to see yourself as wrong or bad for responding in this way. We all respond to conflict in this ineffective way at times. Think of it as just taking a wrong turn on a journey to somewhere, and with a bit of reflection and finding a different route, you can get back on track to where you want to be. This visualization is designed to help you return to a focus on creating a different and more effective way of responding to the events or actions or behaviours that the conflict is actually about. So that's what we're going to move on to now. Keep your awareness of how you're feeling in relation to your conflict, how you feel physically and how you feel emotionally. You may find this has already changed a little since you first considered it earlier. Also, your awareness of where you're responding to your situation by competing or by avoiding, or perhaps both at different times. Be clear that this visualization is about creating a way forward that works for you but not against the other person. It may be that you dislike the other person or people involved intensely and that you think they deserve any criticisms and labels you've applied to them. This isn't about changing how you feel about them. It's just that by focusing in that direction, you won't resolve or improve the impact on yourself of the initial conflict that led to you thinking and feeling that way about them in the first place. So you need to decide your intention and motivation for going forward with this. This visualization won't give you tricks and techniques to win against the other person or overcome them or beat them in some way, or how to stay away from them more effectively while still wanting to undermine them. The next steps will be focused first and foremost on how you can support yourself more effectively in moving forward and in making your contribution to resolving the situation in a way that feels right for you and better than your present feelings about it, but also not in a way that feels like you're failing to meet your own needs in the situation. By supporting yourself more effectively and taking actions that focus on the issues around the conflict itself, you're far more likely to be contributing to its resolution than if you're competing or avoiding, which are instead focusing on the other person rather than the problem. You may say the other person is the problem, but really they're not. It's what they've done or not done that will always be the source of the problem from your perspective, and they may well have similar difficult feelings or thoughts about what you have done or not done. So if you're clear that you want to create a more effective way forward for yourself in relation to your conflict, then let's proceed. All resolved conflicts will include one or more of the following 3 features, and I'll ask you to go on to consider how you might be able to create these in your own situation. The 3 features of any resolved conflict are: learning, where something changes in relation to how the situation itself is responded to; connection, where something changes in relation to how the other person or people are understood or responded to; insight, where something changes in relation to how you see and understand yourself, and where you're able to support yourself more effectively with any difficult feelings you have in relation to the conflict and the other person or people involved. So all aspects of any conflict are covered by these 3 features because they deal with the situation, the other person or persons involved, and yourself. A constructive and supportive change in the responses to one or more of these 3 areas of learning, connection, and insight will move any conflict situation towards resolution, whether that contribution comes from you or from others. In this visualization, you'll decide what you're able to contribute, whether the other person contributes anything or not. Any dependence on the other person to change or contribute will make you powerless. This visualization is about what you have the power to change for yourself, whatever the other person does or does not do. So let's begin with learning. Use the pause button at any time to give yourself time to think about your answers to any questions that I ask. Consider the situation or situations that led to the unresolved conflict you're involved in. If a similar situation happened again, what could be done differently that would improve things? It's important to only focus on what you can do differently or influence to happen, not to simply say the other person should do something else. This is about what you can do and what you can control and influence, not what you wish the other person would do but doesn't. Focusing on that will again leave you feeling powerless, because you are powerless over that. What would be a different way of doing things in the future that you can control or influence and which would feel better to you? What do you need to do in order to make that happen? Why would that feel better to you? What else might be possible if for some reason that idea doesn't work, but which would lead towards the same outcome that you were wanting? Here's an analogy for learning that might help you to think about alternatives. Imagine you drive to work each day and there are roadworks that make your journey much longer than you would normally expect. This is your conflict. You could respond by sitting in the same traffic jam day after day, seething at how long the workers are taking, saying how lazy they are, complaining about the bad planning by the local council. But you'll still be stuck in the traffic jam. Learning would be to spend the next evening looking at a map to see what other routes there are to work that would get you there quicker and less stressed out. The next day you might try the new route out and find it's less stressful, but takes just as long. So the next evening you look for another route. Perhaps you don't find one that's much quicker, but you realise that just by creating a different way of doing things that's much less stressful, You now feel okay about things and will accept the problem of the traffic jam for as long as it lasts. Sure, the traffic jam and roadworks haven't gone away, but you're much less affected by it now. Through taking control of something, you have the power to change. So now return to considering your conflict situation. What do you have the power to change in your situation that might help improve it for you, but which doesn't expect or depend on the other person or situation to change? If you need to pause the recording to write down your thoughts about this, do so at any time. Now let's look at connection. Connection occurs when you're willing to at least listen to or try to understand the other person's point of view without feeling that you have to agree with it. You may not fully understand their viewpoint, but your openness to hearing it means you're not simply dismissing it as crazy or mad or stupid or some other critical term as you would be if you were competing. This is where you acknowledge that instead of you being right and the other person is wrong, you can recognize that your view is right for you and their view is right for them. And so you no longer have to compete to destroy their perspective as if there can only be one right point of view. You acknowledge that it's possible to have a different perspective to your own, even if you find it hard to understand. When you're open to the possibility that another perspective works for them, you can try to accommodate that in your future actions, rather than be surprised at the same rejection, battle, arguments, etc. that occur when you dismiss their view as wrong or crazy or stupid. If you're able to do this in communication with the other person, and by this I mean that instead of focusing on criticizing their viewpoint and trying to find fault in it, you listen to it in order to try to understand it, then it's much more likely that they, in turn, will be more open to listening to your viewpoint, rather than seek to destroy it and criticize it as wrong. Even if they don't change and do still criticize your viewpoint, or if you're not able to discuss it further with them for some reason, your willingness to acknowledge that for them, their view is as right and valid as yours is for you, means you no longer have to focus your energies on winning the argument. Instead, you can consider how your own future actions can still work for you, but take into consideration the point of view they've expressed. You then have to decide if that is a better way forward for you than to simply continue competing with them over who is right and who is wrong. Often, simply understanding the other person's point of view better by at least listening to it means you don't feel so threatened by it. But even if you do still strongly disagree with their viewpoint, when you try to connect rather than compete, it is very likely that a positive change will occur in the situation, because the energy and focus is on improving the problem situation and not beating the other person. So now here are some questions to help with creating connection. What is it about the point of view of the person you have an unresolved conflict with that you strongly disagree with? What do you understand the reasons to be for them to hold that view? Consider whether your answer to that question carries an implied criticism of the person, or whether you're willing to consider that they might have, from their perspective, a valid, considered reason for seeing things as they do, just as you do. Think about the situation that your conflict is about, and what you might be able to do differently in the future that still works for you, but which takes into consideration the views of the other person. You may find it difficult to answer that question, but at least now you're considering it rather than simply dismissing the other person and their point of view. So you're now stepping out of the competitive approach to a more open approach that doesn't waste time and energy on winning against the other person, but is focused instead on moving things forward in ways that support you in resolving the conflict from your point of view. You may need some time to think through your answers to these questions, so use the pause button at any time to think and possibly write down your ideas. Just by improving both your approach and your actions in relation to the situation, you will almost certainly be helping things from the other person's point of view without having to make that your priority. You will have stopped attacking them or avoiding them, and you will have created a more effective way of dealing with the problem that makes it less and less likely to be a cause of conflict between you both in the future. Now let's move on to insight. Creating insight occurs when you've been able to recognize the difficult feelings that arise in you when experiencing your conflict, and then you've gone on to develop ways of supporting yourself with those difficult feelings. So you might feel frightened by something that happens in the situation, or you might become uncontrollably angry or sad or intimidated, or you might become physically tense or uneasy in some way. Whatever the feeling is as you experience it. At the start of this visualization, I asked you to consider what your difficult feelings are in relation to your conflict situation, both physically and emotionally. Now I'm going to ask you to return to that awareness and decide which are the most difficult feelings you have about it, whether you can put a name to them or not. Now try to work out why you feel that way, whether it is anger, frustration, fear, intimidation, confusion, or any physical or emotional sensation, whether you have a name for it or not. What happens or what does someone do or say that leads to that feeling arising within you? If this difficult feeling is an important part of the stress and pain that comes from this unresolved conflict, think about what would, in the moment it arises, help you deal with that feeling. What could happen to support you while feeling it? Or what could happen that would mean you don't feel it? What would you want to happen in that moment that could help you to feel much better in that situation? Take a moment to think about what that might be. Now think through how you might be able to provide that for yourself if the situation were to happen again. So it's important to eliminate things that rely on the other person doing something different or changing. This is about what you can do for yourself. So as an example, it might be that you don't like the way someone speaks to you in a particular situation, but you feel too intimidated or embarrassed or worried about how angry you might become if you said something to them about it. But you realise that in that moment, what you'd like would be to have the conversation in another space, perhaps away from others watching, and then you'd be able to say things without embarrassment. So you decide that if it were to happen again, something that would help you would be if you were to ask for a separate space in which to discuss things, perhaps immediately or at a later time. Or you may decide you want to send an email to the person to request that, because you might find even requesting a meeting in front of everyone is not something you'd like to do. The important thing is that you keep reflecting on and creating more and more ideas and ways for what you need to support yourself, and the best way in which you can make that happen that doesn't rely on others to change. Once you've created some ways of having a separate discussion, you might then go on to decide how you would say what you feel is important, and perhaps think through what might then happen if you do get the response you'd like from the other person, and of course what you might do if you don't get that. The point of creating any of the three responses, learning, connection or insight, is that you don't remain stuck in the problem, revisiting the past actions and complaining about them and the other person. You accept that what has happened and look to create a way of responding that feels better to you, both for now and in the future. In creating insight, the focus is not on how bad the other person is for making you feel the way you feel, which of course they don't, only you can make you feel how you feel. The focus is on visualizing how you can best support yourself in dealing with your difficult feelings if something similar were to happen again in the future. In this way, you're empowering yourself to create the changes you need, rather than waiting and wishing for the other person to change, which means you're no longer dependent on that happening. Through this guided visualization, you've had a chance to connect with yourself and acknowledge the difficult feelings and thoughts you have about your conflict situation. You've reflected on where you're responding in a way that won't help you, whether by competing or avoiding, but you've also accepted that that's a normal way of doing things. It just doesn't work to resolve the situation or help you to move forward. You may still continue to compete or avoid at times, but your awareness that you're doing it will mean that you can gradually change those responses to more effective ones. You've also started to create one or more of learning, connection or insight responses to help you move forward from your difficult situation in a way that feels better to you. Don't worry if you can't create all 3 types of response. That may not be necessary. Just go with what feels best for you. You may or may not have been able to listen to this visualization all in one go. It doesn't really matter if you have or you haven't. What does matter is that you've come to an awareness of your own difficult feelings and thoughts about your unresolved conflict, and have been able to recognize where you've been dealing with it in ways that won't work for you, so that you've then been able to create changes in how you're dealing with it towards ways that do work for you. These changes will always be focused towards supporting you in dealing with the situation more effectively for yourself. But the added benefit of this is that by making those changes, it helps the overall situation as well, including the experience of the other person or people involved, simply because there's no longer someone who is fighting with them or avoiding them. You've created ideas for actions that are not dependent on the other person changing, and so you've empowered yourself through creating choices about how you wish to act differently in the future. I hope you found this visualization useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up on the YouTube screen and subscribe to the Communication and Conflict channel for information about more videos in the future. If you have any questions, comments or requests for future videos, please leave them in the comments section as well. Thank you for listening.